Okay, good morning. Today's Shir, Wednesday, Dalid Nisan, Toshin Pei Aleph, is on Rambam Hilchus Gezeilah V'Aveda Perek Vav Halach Aleph and Beis. First, I'll read the halach in the Rambam, and then we'll talk a little bit about it in an actual interesting contemporary case. The Rambam writes as follows. It's based on a Gemara in Bava Metzia, Daf Chav Dalid Amid Aleph. The Gemara brings the din of Zutay Shel Yam, the froth of the sea, and it says that in a way, if there's a possibility that the owners cannot go and retrieve what they lost, so their ownership is expunged. They're not owners anymore, and whoever takes that object, it's his. It remains his. And the Rambam says as follows: various items, whether it's pieces of wood or stones that the river swept away. If their owners gave up, if their owners despaired, they had yush, so therefore whoever finds them, it's permitted. But if we don't know if there was yush, we don't know if they despaired, he's obligated to return. If somebody retrieves an item from a river or from the tempestness of the sea, if he knows for sure that the owners despaired from ever recovering those items once again, these are his. And if he doesn't know if the owners despaired, he should return them. The topic of today's shir, I heard from a very reliable source, a story that a few Bachrim went many years ago on Merkish Luchas to a city, and a non-Jewish lady came over to them and said that she is from Poland or Riga. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not quite sure. And the Nazis in Machshemam were burning books. And she knew that the books were holy, even though she's not Jewish, but she held them in high regard. So she sacrificed herself, and she went, and at the edge of the bonfire, she took 2 or 3 books and held them and rescued them. And she said that I live here in this little town for whatever, 20 years or so, whatever the amount of years it was, and I wanted to return them to Jews, but I don't see the Jews like I saw in Poland. I don't see the type of Jews. Until I've seen you, I see you with your payas, etc. So here I'm giving it back to you. The person that told me the story is a very reliable person. He told me that they were actually books of Chassidus, books of not manuscript Chassidus. I believe it was Kupir. It was copied Chassidus, and in the cover it said the name of the Chassid, Reb Zalman Gurari, and they came back to New York and they gave the Seforim to the Rebbe. Again, the person that told me the story is reliable. He told me that Reb Zalman Gurari, and they went to Reb Zalman and told him, hey, guess what? We found some of your old books, old Seforim, and we gave it to the Rebbe. So Reb Zalman wrote into the Rebbe that it's his, it's not the libraries, it's his Seforim. And the Rebbe answered back on the note that Reb Zalman wrote, Zutei Shel Yam, which is our halacha, which is primarily that the Machshemam, the Nazis, once they confiscated Seforim, these are considered Zutei Shel Yam. These are considered irreplaceable, and you're never going to get it back again, and therefore it's not yours anymore. Interestingly enough, I later saw in a very similar story with Seforim that belonged to the library of the Rebbe of Gur, Again, the same Nakuda that he found out that some people had some of his Seforim, and he demanded that they return it to him. And at least the primary, the original answer was Zuti Shalyam. Another thing was many years ago, in the early 80s, there was a very famous case of an auction in Sotheby's regarding Seforim that were smuggled out of Germany. And the question became, and they were originally part of a library. And the question again became, and it was that's already a slightly different case, but it's primarily going on the same Nakuda. Whether Seforim or objects or items that was confiscated by the Germans, whether the person who has them can keep them. Whether the person who has them can keep them. Okay, so we're going to discuss that for a few seconds, and based on this Rambam that we're learning today, and also the halacha and Shulchan Aruch L'maisa. So, remember, we have to realize that there's a constant, the halacha of yush. What is yush? When a person despairs of something that is that he lost. So this is a option for somebody who finds it to keep it. The question is also, so number one, the question is whether the person who finds these items, it was miyayish. And number two, there's a stronger part of Yush, which is called Zutei Shalyam, the tempestuousness of the sea, where we could say theoretically that he is miyayish bal karcha. He has Yush, the person despairs of it almost against his will. He sees something being swept away by the sea, whether he wants to or not. He ends up being despaired. There's a third category which I don't want to talk about today, which is called kibush milchama, which is when there's a war and a opposing king takes items away, whether that king or that army has the right to keep it, etc., etc. Or somebody buys it from the army or from the king, whether he has to give it back. Okay. There's an interest regarding Seforim in particular, which is why I chose this topic. Regarding Seforim in particular, and various precious objects, religious objects that have a meaning to Jewish owners or Orthodox owners, etc. Taisus in Bava Kama says that it's a Taisus Daf Kufyu Dalid Amid Beis. Divrei Masal Hamaki Taisus says Ein Regilus Lis Yayish Misfarim. There's people, Jews particularly, are not in the habit of despairing of ever seeing their Seforim again. And the pshat, I guess, is because what does a non-Jew need a Aktsas or a Rambam? What does he do with it? So he'll return it, or let's say a pair of tefillin maybe. He thought he stole something of value. He thought he stole something that looks nice in a velvet bag or a nice book, etc. But when he opens it, he realizes that it's nothing to do with him. So he'll go back to the shul, he'll go back to the yeshiva and give it. So actually, that's the Ramah Paskins talk like that. The Ramah Paskins like Taisus, and the Ramah says that by Seforim there's no Yush. We're talking here about Yush now, not about Zutei Shalyam, about Stam despair. So the Ramah and Choshen Mishpat simulation test paskin v'yesh oimrim dim avat Seforim lo miyayish minayu afilu b'makim shiru b'evik gachavim. If he loses Seforim, he's not miyayish. He doesn't despair even in a place where there's a lot of goyim. Okay, so in various chuvas that deal with this topic, they say that what happened in the Holocaust, and even going back in the Gezeilah Tafnatat and different various non-Jewish pogroms, that is different than what the Shulchan Aruch and Taisus is talking about. These are different circumstances, and in those cases, there is a forced yush, and they give two reasons. Number one reason basically is that during the Holocaust and during other terrible incidents, the Jewish people were in fear of their lives, they were in fear that they're going to lose their lives, Rahman al-Islam. And in many cases they did. So if they were miyayish on their lives, kolshkein, the kalvachaymer, they're miyayish on their objects, on their starim. That's number one. And number two, they were, it wasn't so much that they're miyayish, but they just dropped everything and left, and because they wanted to save themselves, and it was something that they consciously, so to speak, gave away. Okay. But there are those that argue with this and say that that's not the case because people didn't know exactly what was going on. They thought they'll come home after the war, et cetera, whatever. So again, so this is regarding stam hiush, despair. But then when you have the concept of zute shel yam, which is a situation where Yimach Shimon, they took it, they put it into a fire. The person sees his books going into a fire or hears about his books going into a fire. This is already not yush, this is already zute shel yam. So interestingly enough, we have the Rambam. The Rambam isn't so simple. The Rambam doesn't say that zute shel yam is automatically a something that that constitutes yush. The Rambam says im yodim, if we know that he was miyayish, so he can keep it. So right away we have the Rosh. The Rosh argues on the Rambam, and the Rosh says that whoever rescues from a lion or from a bear or from the tempestness of the sea, etc., any place where there's a rabbin, a person loses a wallet on Fifth Avenue, and he thinks he'll come back next day and find his wallet on Fifth Avenue, or he'll find it with his money, he's a fool. So it says the Rosh, Harei elu shaloi, because the Rosh learns, he argues on the Rambam, and he says for sure there's no question that the owners were miyayish, and even if he screams, the Rosh says even if afilu oimid v'tzavach nasik itzavach al beis shenafal, even if we hear the guy screaming, no, I'm not giving up. I know I'll get it back. I know that the books will not be burnt. I know that the books will be returned to me, or the etc. The objects will be returned. Says the Rosh, it's a foolish despair, because it's as if somebody is screaming about his house that already fell down. And actually, the Shulchan Aruch and Choshen Mishpat, Reish Montes again, that we brought down before the Ramah, here the Shulchan Aruch paskins not like the Rambam, paskins like the Rosh. Hamatzil min ha'ari u'minadoy v'zutu shoyam harei elu shaloi afilu shabalei misham v'tzavach. The Shulchan Aruch paskins simply like the Rosh, that in zute shoyam there is no need to wonder whether a person is miyayish. It's an automatic yush. So interestingly enough, there was a very great Rav. Lately, there has been talk about him in relation to the smicha that he gave the Rebbe in Berlin. A very, very big Talmud Chacham. His name was Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. He made a tshuva called Sefer Tshuvas called Svidei Eish, and he actually dealt with a lot of issues dealing with the Holocaust, pre-Holocaust, post-Holocaust. So he was asked this question, and he has a long tshuva, Siman Kuf Mem Zayin in Chelik Aleph Svidei Eish, and he actually says that it's not so simple. When it comes to Seforim, we brought that, which is why I brought down before the words of Tosfos, that Seforim is not miyayish, and Ramah paskins like that. So in the specific case of Seforim, in the case, let's say, of the rechush of a Jew, we have a lot of cases lately talking about artwork, etc. In the case of a rechush of a Yid is one thing. But when it comes to Seforim, he writes that he saw personally how Yimach Shimon, they would take Seforim and they would put it into a library, and it got rescued. And I personally was in a country in South America where I walked into a shul, and there was a collection of Seforim from various libraries of Berlin and Frankfurt. And I asked, how do these Seforim come here? And I was told that after the war, it's a famous story, it's not something that I revealed, that after the war, there was these warehouses of Seforim, of libraries, from Germany and from other big kehillas that were no more Nebuch, and the Allied forces didn't know what to do with them. So, in conjunction with various Jewish agencies, they decided to send Seforim to various communities. So one day, in front of a shul in Argentina, huge boxes of Seforim came. Then the Yidden in the shul didn't know what these were. They saw Seforim, they put it in the shelf. In some cases, there were very valuable Seforim with stamps, Bibliothek the Yiddish Gemeinde Berlin, the Bibliothek Yiddish Gemeinde Frankfurt. So the 3D is correct. That's in many cases they didn't destroy them; they just put them with Shmira. But going back to our original story, the Rebbe felt that the halacha is like the Pashtus HaShulchan Aruch, that in Zutei Shel Yam there was it's his, even though the Rama writes by Sorim there's no Yush. I guess the Rebbe felt that there's no Stam Yush, but when it comes to Zutei Shel Yam, even Lagabe Seforim, even Lagabe these things, there was Yush, and we see the story was that it wasn't taken away into a library. The lady said that it was being burnt. The question becomes, and this and I'll conclude, there's an interesting machlekes between the Shach and the Ktsas HaCheshen, whether there is a chiyuv lifnim mishuras hadin to return the Seforim, and interestingly enough, that that the Shach I guess learns, if I'm not mistaken, the Shach learns in Siman Shin Nun Vav that there is no din of Lifnei Mishuras Hadin in this regard, and the Ktsas wants to say that there seems to be a din of returning after a Geneva. We're not talking about Zutei Shel Yam. This is Stam, I want to make clear. We're talking about the laws of Geneva. If somebody stole something, and even though the owner was Miyayish, whether after Yush, the person who received the items, whether he has a Lifnim Mishuras Hadin obligation to return them. So the Shach says no, and the Ktsas wants to say that there is a ethical obligation to return. And again, this is not talking about Stam Yush, this is talking about the Neighbor.